Hello, hi Natalie.
Hello, good afternoon, Helen.
How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, not so bad, thank you. Um, Welcome. I want to just say a few words of introduction to Natalie, for those of you who haven't looked at Wharton Business Consulting before this session. But before I do that, let me explain, introduce myself, because some of you may not know who I am. I'm the founder of The Tall Wall, and we are a specialist coaching company. And we believe that 21st century business should not be at the expense of individuals, their families, or society. And therefore, we help organizations to create the conditions to enable all talent to thrive. And much of our work is around female talent. I feel very passionate about this topic. I have an 8-year-old daughter, and I would like to say that I've done all I can to help her and her peers when they enter the workplace 12 years or so down the line. I also have a son, and I want this for him too. I want everyone to be able to thrive at work. We are joined by Natalie Wharton. Natalie is the founder of Wharton Business Consulting, and I have known Natalie what feels like a million years. And Natalie is a lesson in the power of informal networks, because I think, Natalie, I'm right in saying we met at the nursery gate, not even the school gate, it was the nursery gate. And we kept in touch so all that time. And when we both left our Big Four roles, we started to collaborate together. Myself in The Tall Wall and Natalie in Wharton Business Consulting. So I'm very glad that we have been able to work together after all these years of knowing each other informally. So Natalie, do you want to say a few words about yourself and about your business?
Thank you, Helen. And yes, great introduction. And we love working with The Tall Wall and partnering with you on several of our clients. And at Wharton Business Consulting, we are about helping businesses thrive by maximising their potential through their people and their culture. So we do behavioural change programs, large-scale transformation programs, we do talent development programs, leadership development, but it's all centred around helping businesses achieve their strategy, their purpose and their vision through their people and culture. And this is such an important topic, well, it's an important topic to both of us in our businesses, because it's something we're often asked, as I know you are as well. So really excited and thrilled to be invited here today to talk about it.
Thank you, Natalie. And we're delighted to have you, because there's a lot of wisdom in what you do. There's a lot of experience and knowledge that you hold that I think will be really interesting in this conversation. And what we're talking about here is how do we help women to thrive in their career? And we've gone with this provocative title of Why Are Women Leaving Your Organization? And I make no apologies for that title, because it's true. We see women voting with their feet more often than not. And it's never been a better time to be a reasonably senior woman in an organization and to go elsewhere and look for a different role and enhance and develop your career in that way. You know, I really feel that there are forward-thinking, I know there are forward-thinking organizations out there that genuinely can see the economic upside of greater gender diversity and equality. I mean, who would have thought it? There is money to be made. There is actual bottom line impact of having greater gender diversity. And those organizations that are not cottoned onto this fact will be left behind in the war on talent. And so we see these organizations that just cannot or will not keep up with or don't even have gender diversity anywhere near the top of their agenda, and they will lose female talent as a result, and they will suffer economic consequences as a result. You must see this all the time, Natalie, in the work that you do, and this idea that women are voting with their feet. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I just wanted to reinforce what you're saying around the importance of this. This isn't charity. This is actually a business imperative for competitive advantage and sustainability going forward. And before this, I was just like, there must be a really good stat around how much it's bringing to businesses. And McKinsey recently shared that actually their research shows that in the US, closing that gender gap will create $2.1 trillion for the economy. So I think businesses are starting to appreciate that there is a true business case for this. It's not just about meeting targets, which is a great turning point, because I'm sure you've felt the same. For many years, we have seen a bit of lip service to this, and organisations really struggling with how they go about it as well. And I think what's key here is the last 18 months has shown businesses that we can work a bit more flexibly. We can actually be opening our eyes to some of those blockers that were in a way for females working in the past. Some of those have come down, and actually for females there's been a bit more choice that this is presented. Now, you and I have talked about, actually in some cases it's created more inequalities over the last 18 months. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But ultimately, we're at such a pivotal point of organisations really addressing this issue and thinking about what is it that they need to do to help actually close the gap in gender for themselves.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It is no longer lip service. This is a genuine business imperative, and that is the difference. It's not about doing the right thing. It's about doing something that is a genuine business case. So let's look at why women are leaving then. So just getting under the skin of why are they going? And as a coach, I am in often a very privileged position, myself and my colleagues, where we get to hear things that the organization would never get to hear. And of course, some of the reasons people leave are very personal to them, very specific circumstances, but more often than not, the reason why women leave that I hear is lack of career development. They want to go further in their career, and for whatever reason, the system is not allowing that. And that's coupled with the sense that the organization is very slow to change. So whilst everyone's got a good intent, nothing on the ground is really changing. And so they see, if I stick around here, things are never going to change. We also see that leaders, and I think this is so fascinating, leaders with the best of intent genuinely have a vision for their organization often around diversity. But on the ground, that is not filtering through into the DNA of the organization for whatever reason. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. For whatever reason, that is not filtering down from the vision at the top. So the lived experience of women on the ground is not the sort of outward PR voice of the organization. And therefore, that is why women are moving, because they see these organizations as slow to change. And there's one thing said over here, but the reality is actually quite different. With your culture change hat on, you must see this all the time when you're looking at cultures and organizations and suboptimal cultures. You must see this all the time, that the conditions are not as we would hope them to be, and that leaders expect them to be.
Yeah, definitely, Helen. And I think you've picked up three key things that I wanted to expand on there. But one, very much so, is thinking about, for an organization, understanding, get under the skin of what's going wrong. There's this wonderful phrase that Aviva Wittenberg-Cox talks about around the gender jaws. So sort of thinking about organizations, to your point, have positive intent. They recruit 50-50%, particularly at graduate level. But by the time you get to executive board level, as we know, there's sort of 93% male, 7% female in some organizations. And there's lots of organizations trying to change that at either ends and do something. But you need to look at what's going wrong through the whole lifespan and career of the employees in your organization. So thinking about everything that influences that and that whole ecosystem. So when we look at culture, we look at various levers across that, around from leaders, and as you pointed out there, one of the key reasons people leave is because career progression, but also that well-known phrase, you don't leave an organization, you leave your line manager. Because actually that person that has so much influence around you, your direct line manager, if they don't have the tools and the way to think differently and be able to look at how you're going to work in this environment. That's critical. So there's loads of elements there. But the other point that I wanted to pick up on is the great opportunity you have in your coaching. It's really hearing the hum of the organization. So organizations don't really listen. They set a great target. So as you were saying earlier, they have positive intent, but is there action in terms of the words that they bring? And there's some great research out there. One of our research partners, Professor Megan Wrights and John Higgins, they did a huge research piece for Astridge around speaking truth to power and why people aren't speaking up. But there's also why aren't people listening as well, or listening up. So for organizations, you really need to understand and get to the bottom of what's happening and listen to your organization and your people. Yeah. And I'm sure you've got threads of that and heard some horror stories as well as some wonderful stories of support and mentors and coaches across the organization. But there's also quite a few things that executives and senior leaders just don't hear, and they often say, well, it's fine, we can do this, we'll set these targets. But they really need to understand their organization.
And I love, there's so many stories I could share, mostly horror stories, but when we feed back to organizations what we see, often that feedback goes down like a bucket of sick, because senior leaders who hear that go, I'm like, my God, that is not my organization, because people will not speak up, and there's that whole issue of psychological safety and feeling like I can speak up and I can voice this. But I absolutely agree with your point about getting to the root cause. Don't make assumptions about what's going on. Get to the root cause. And anyone that's listened to any Instagram live of mine recently, or webinar or LinkedIn or anything, will have heard me harp on about this concept of the fish tank. And this concept comes from Dr. William Tate from the Institute of Systemic Leadership. And we use this concept in the following way. If the organization is a tank, and inside the tank are some fish swimming, you can't take the fish out the tank and give them a bit of a polish with some coaching and some training and mentoring, and then plop them back into the tank that is full of polluted water. Because those fish will not thrive, and actually very few people thrive in that tank. It won't just be the women that are not thriving. There'll be other people that are not thriving. There'll be a very certain type of person, usually the big sharks, that do thrive in that water. But you can't take the women out and hope to fix them with a bit of mentoring, coaching, training, whatever, and put them back in. Because, by the way, women do not need fixing. It is the systems and the organizations that they're swimming in that need fixing, because these organizations, through no fault of their own, were not designed with difference in mind. You talked a little bit earlier, you mentioned about hybrid working right at the beginning, and we were talking about this earlier, weren't we, Natalie? And now is a really critical time where organizations can start to make a change on the ground, and they have to make a change on the ground, because we are coming into a hybrid way of working. And what's really interesting for me is lockdown had rules. There were clear rules about how we were all going to work in lockdown, because there just was. The government said, this is how you're going to work, and we all adapted very quickly, and we all had to work from home. Hybrid feels much looser, like how it's going to work. People talk about hybrid as though it's a thing. Actually, it's just a concept, and the rules of the game are very broad and unclear as far as I can see, even when organizations have come out and made a statement. And we were talking, and I was saying, and you were agreeing, that 3 weeks ago or so, I was in London having lunch with a client. We were two women in a very busy restaurant in the city, and we were having a lovely lunch. It was midweek, and I was pleased to see this restaurant was heaving. I was delighted that there's so many people out having lunch in London, in the city. And then I looked around, and I realized, with the exception of my table and another table, we were the only women in that entire restaurant. And I looked around, and the rest of the people were all men of a certain age, all white, all dressed in a certain way. And I got goosebumps, and I thought, my God, this is what is going to happen. There's going to be an in crowd who go into the office, and there's going to be an out crowd of women, potentially parents, caregivers, other people, beta males, who will not go in the office. And that worries me. I think there's an opportunity for inclusive leadership to play a really key part in how we go back to the workplace.
Yeah, 100%. And I think there's two things for me in that. There's the key element around the organization thinking about, as they really plan logistically how this is going to work, and whether they're going to say people need to come in 3 days a week or 2 days, or it's flexible. All of that is great and it's important to think through. But what's even more important is to think about the unintended consequences of some of that. For example, I was on a panel recently with Tanji Morgan, and she had done a lot of looking into the research around present privilege, which is an interesting concept that actually, if you are near the boss in the office, you're there for the conversation, the can I grab you a moment, you have a privilege to that. You will be more likely recognized because of the way that our brains work, that we will remember that person in front of us. We'll remember and recognize and think about all of the things that they've achieved for us because they were there. And it's really important that organizations think about, actually, are there unintended consequences of how I'm setting up this team environment, how I am opening the doors around hybrid working. But there's also individual accountability for this. So I'm hearing both male and female who are saying, oh, well, you know, I've now set up my environment that it works really nicely with home. I've got, you know, this that I go to at this time, or I pick up at that time. It's really important as individuals, we have an ability to think about the environment we're setting up, the constructs we're setting up as well, and that we're not disadvantaging ourselves, or we are not in a situation where we're creating something that creates blockers for us and in our careers. So I think that's important. And one other point around hybrid working, which I'd love to get your views on, is I think there's a lot of people doing quick fixes around, yes, we can work flexibly now. You can work on these days or from this location, which is great. But coming back to your earlier point, we need to think about not just the words there and what we are putting in place, but actually thinking about, is our environment, is the whole ecosystem around that going to enable that? So are line managers going to recognize that actually someone is working in a different way and is choosing the hours, and they might be dialing on and dialing off at different ways? Are we recognizing some of the great achievements over the last 12 months where people have been much more empathetic, socially connected, and really understanding their teams, yet financial targets are still going to be rewarded at the year end?
Yes.
So I appreciate for organizations, there's so much to think about. But before we jump at, you know, you can work flexibly in this way, we also need to think more about, how is our system going to support that?
Yeah. You mentioned two things there that are really interesting. One, the onus on the individual to not just work from home all the time, which I think is interesting. And the other is on this pastoral care and recognizing the value that maybe the ones that don't shout the loudest, but those who have looked after others, helped hold people together through this absolutely dreadful time we've all lived through. And I'm just wanted to go back to the responsibility, the onus on the individual. I was coaching a woman not recently, it was a little while ago, when she was allowed to go back to the office, but had chosen not to. So there was a period of time where she was allowed to go in kind of 1 day a week. And she went back in and realized, shock horror, that lots of people had been going in her team, and she hadn't really clocked on to this. And she could see they were very that was her way, it was cliquey. They were very that obviously just found this relationship between themselves that she wasn't really part of. And so I absolutely agree, the onus on the individual in this hybrid working world to not just stay at home all the time, as tempting and as easy as that may be, because human nature means you may be disadvantaged even with all the inclusive leadership training in the world. But also you made that point about pastoral care and organizations recognizing the different contributions individuals have made through this crisis. And I know from working with, for example, partners in law firms, they do especially women, do a lot of the pastoral support, and they are not recognised for it because the way success is measured is in fees billed, and someone has to train and look after and support the more junior people in the team, and it often falls to the women. Not always, I'm talking stereotypes here, but that isn't recognised. I think that's a problem that could come down the line in this hybrid way of working. So long and the short of it then, if you're an organisation that is fearful that they're losing women, or is kind of thinking we are on the verge of losing women because there's a new competitor, they can sense that there's a kind of tide flowing in the direction they don't want it to flow, what then can organisations do? They can understand the root cause rather than make assumptions. They can invest in inclusive leadership so that particularly in this hybrid world, we are doing the very best we can to involve everyone. They can encourage people as much as possible to not just work from home, but to come in and have FaceTime with the office as well. What else do you see them being able to do to turn around things for them culturally? It's a long process. This is not a fix that's going to happen overnight. These are long, deeply ingrained ways of working which take time, but even signaling to the organization that we are making change can have a huge impact. But we actually need to see it on the ground.
Definitely. And like you say, it's not a sticky plaster. You have to think about this as a systemic issue and something that has been created over a long period of time, and assumptions and beliefs and values that have existed, in our careers, in the businesses that we work for a long time. But I guess a real nice little framework that I was thinking about in terms of encapsulating all of this is 3 T's actually. Target. So think about, to your point, what is the target you're looking to achieve? Targets have, as much as they're not the sort of end game, to get a purpose, get a real business case, get a real view on what you're trying to achieve with closing the gender gap and what it looks like. So business leaders understand not that it's just an imperative of a target, but it has a business meaning. So get that target and plan in place. Secondly, talk. So as we've talked about, talk to your people, listen, not just give them a voice, actually listen to what they're saying to really understand, why hasn't this worked today? Why are women leaving? Why are anyone leaving the organisation? And really get down into what are those root causes and maybe those underlying conversational habits that happen in your organisation, a great piece that Megan talks about in her research. And then thirdly, a piece that we haven't quite touched on, which is around T for training. So for me, how do we help? So you might have the greatest plan in the world, you might have the greatest will in the world, but you need the skill in your line managers all the way through your organization to know actually how we recognize, to your point earlier, how we support, how do we allocate work, how do we work in this environment. So giving them the skills and equipping them, I think is really, really important. It's just a quick way of looking at a framework across this.
Yeah. Natalie, we could talk about this all day. I know we frequently do talk about it all day. But we're running out of time. So I want to thank you for joining us and sharing your perspective. For anyone who doesn't follow Wharton Business Consulting, look them up. There's some great content on their website, and they're also on all the channels we're on, so Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, probably Clubhouse. Are you on Clubhouse yet, Natalie? You will be. If not, you'll be there soon. And our next Instagram live is with Nora Durant, who is on this live with us, I think. She's joined. And we'll be talking on the 1st of July with her about female talent and why now is the time for female talent to step up and move forward in their career. Nora is a specialist recruitment consultant working with senior female lawyers. So she has a very unique perspective on the world. Thank you ever so much, Natalie. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And we'll look forward to speaking again soon.
Thank you. Great chat. Bye.
Bye-bye.